Father's Day prayer was written by Kristen Grassel-Schmidt. Ground of all being, great nurturing spirit, this morning especially, we give thanks for beautiful days right in between spring and summer, for flowers and green trees and freshly cut grass and lazy lakeside afternoons, for the sound and sight and heart swell of being together in this place made holy by our presence, for church years gone well, for ice cream and all manner of frozen treats on warm summer days, and for all who father, for all who have warm and loving relationships with their fathers and children, we give thanks. For those who, for whatever reason, did not know their fathers, we will try to remember that this can be an uncomfortable day for you and others. And for those whose relationships with their fathers or children is painful or complicated, we support you. This Father's Day, we lift up our gratitude for all kinds of fathers, and for the amazing ways fatherly love transcends bloodlines and legal categories. And this morning especially, we pray for peace. Peace in faraway lands and peace at home. Peace in our community, peace in every heart. For these and for all the hopes and aches and prayers of our own hearts, we pray for love's sake. Amen. Tired and sore, dazed from senseless, panicking dreams. On the days I am not my father, I hold my son when he cries. Let him touch my face without flinching. Lie down with him until he falls asleep. Realize that just because he has a sharp tongue, just because he's sometimes mean, just because he's smarter than me, doesn't mean he'll become my father. On the days I am not my father, holding you is enough until holding you is no longer enough for either of us. I listen well. I let things go unfinished in an order I didn't plan. My mouth is relaxed. My teeth don't hurt. My face stays a healthy shade of pink all day. On the days I am not my father, I don't fill the silence with my own irrational rants. I don't resent the voices of others. I don't make fun of you to make myself feel better. On the days I am not my father, I don't care who wins or loses. The news can't ruin my day. I water plants, I cook, I laugh at myself. I can imagine living without my beard, with my hair cut, without the fear of looking too much like my father. On the days I am not my father, I romp and play. I don't compare myself with everyone else. The night is always long enough. I like how much I'm like my father.
I remember when Carol and I were going through the membership class to join this church 10 years ago, and Allison, who was the pastor at the time, said, "What's the theology and the beliefs of this place?" Well, it's kind of the combination of whoever's here, which I really like that idea. So you're going to get, how many members do we have now? 80, 87, something? 90? You are going to get 1/90th of what this place believes today. I've been asked to speak about what being a father means in my spirituality. I'm 75 now. My oldest son Greg is 47, and my youngest is 45. I've been a father for a long time. As I've been thinking, I'm not sure how much I remember and how much I remember what I figured out about those years. And I'm sure that if you ask Carol, you discover that she has some very different memories. So that this is just the way I remember it, the way I think about it. I've been mulling the question of the role of fatherhood over the last weeks, and what I find is that my sense of myself and my relationship with the world were in large extent determined by my place in the generations of fathers. We don't know much about my grandfather, though my cousin who did the family history has been able to find out more than most. It's not a family that talked about things very much. My grandfather was a Jewish cobbler. He came here when shoes were factory made. He never really found a place for himself economically. At one point he tried farming. A strange thing for a guy from the shtetl, but that's what he did. And when all of the big Jewish family in Chicago figured out that somebody had a farm, they shipped all the kids out there to my grandmother. She cracked under that. We're not quite sure of the circumstances, but she was sent to an insane asylum. She died when my father was 8. Shortly after that, apparently my grandfather married another woman. Again, my I knew none of it. I learned some of this stuff the night of my father's funeral, and I learned a lot of the rest of it a couple of years ago when my cousin and I joined my brother in Idaho for a week of talking about things. So apparently the stepmother brought in 2 children whom she took care of but did not take care of. When I said to my cousin, well, what was the problem? My cousin said, well, she didn't feed anybody but her own kids. So my dad was a very wounded child, but of course I couldn't figure that out at the time, and with an incredible need to control his world in a way that his world had been out of control. He was an incredibly talented guy. He could do all the trades. Every time I pick up tools and fumble like I do, I feel badly once more. I'm quite convinced that I was sent for an education because he was convinced I could not make an honest living. So he was a wounded child, and I needed to get away from that. And so I separated myself from him emotionally at about 12 to 14. I found some surrogate fathers who were very helpful. I'm a youth minister at the church, a scoutmaster. And certainly my being active in a Baptist youth group, it was a liberal Baptist church, if you can believe there is such a thing, was trying to find a religious or a spiritual community, and certainly a theology and a meaning system that I didn't have at home, because my dad associated that childhood of his with being Jewish. He would never say, I'm Jewish. He married a North Irish Protestant. I understand religious conflict. If you're psychoanalytically inclined, you could say that I was looking for a better father in God. That's not a real good thing to do, because parent gods tend to let us down. So I found a really better solution in graduate school and then in my academic life by studying grief of parents whose kids had died, because that's a universal spiritual crisis, and then looking at how that works out in various contexts like Japanese ancestor rituals or Wahhabi. In other words, I did cross-cultural study of grief in the latter part of my academic career. And my day job was chairing a department of religious studies in which we grounded it in all the world's religions. I was the guy who hired and paid the rabbi and the Rashi and the preacher. It was a wonderful part. But again, that's another solution to that problem of mixed parentage. When my sons were born, I decided that the pathology would stop with me. And I was very aware of how I fathered my sons, and I had an incredibly good partner in parenting. Both Carol and I were, Carol was working with kids who were at risk of abuse and neglect. We were both she had done a degree in child study. We were very aware of our parenting. And now when I see my older son as he parents my grandchildren, and we see the healthy patterns repeating themselves, it feels like we did a good job, at least in that part of our life. But we've been very lucky. My younger son is unlikely to have kids. He and his fiancée have a wonderful life, but it doesn't, she's got like 6 sisters and they've all got kids. She did her part in the family. She doesn't need to do that. She's in total delight. By the way, I really understand the father-son relationship because I've been in it, but as the boys have attached themselves to women, I've learned the father-daughter thing, and it's a little different, but a lot of fun. I think it's a real tribute to Carol that the women they have chosen are very smart, very articulate, very independent. I want a girl just like the girl that married dear old dad, I think shows up in our family. Both of our sons are healthy and bright. Nature did its part, and Carol and I worked very hard on the nurture part, but we really do understand that we got the luck of the draw on that one. When we see parents, who are our friends now, whose kids have congenital issues. If some friends now have I can't even do it anymore. The kids, the autistic kids. When I thank you. See, 75 has certain disadvantages. When we see people who've adopted kids who were traumatized before they came into the family, we really do realize how lucky we were. When I was very young, the kids gave me the joy, fathering kids gave me the joy of getting back my body. Cuddling, wrestling, rolling around. You know, it's been a long time. Garrison Keillor once said, it's been a long time since anybody grabbed me and held me up and said, aren't you a big boy? And I really miss that now. We were stranded in the San Juan airport for a day because we missed a flight. There was a young couple from Nantucket there with two little kids. We had to walk the length of the airport. It's a big, sprawling place, to a hotel that they had gotten for us. And I said to this 4-year-old, Annabelle, would you like a ride? So I swung her up on my shoulders and walked with her. It felt so good just to have this kid hanging on my shoulders. I really do miss that. Her father kept saying, oh, thank you for your help, thank you for your help. And I kept saying, don't you understand how much I miss this? Every time I walk at the corner there by Town Hall where Lisa's shop is, I don't know if it's still there, but on the roof up there used to be a cafe. And I have wonderful memories of sitting drinking birch beer and talking to my younger son about Jack London's Call of the Wild. We still talk about books. We still share that kind of stuff. It's wonderful. One of the predominant memories my kids have is me coming into the room and yelling, damn it, turn that TV off. Don't you know you're ruining your minds? And the kids, my kids didn't back off. Then I remember Greg saying, no, Dad, you don't understand. This is a good program. It was Quantum Leap. Do you remember the guy who fell into various lives? And so he convinced me it was a good program. So we used to watch it and talk about it. So a couple of weeks ago, that kid that said that is now a professor of law in Washington, and so we're riding around in the car, and I said, Greg, I don't understand, one academic to another. How can you say that law is a legitimate academic discourse when it can arrive at illogical conclusions like money is votes, and money is a vote in corporations or persons? And he said, you don't know, Dad, you don't understand. I said, where have I heard that before? So we're still, and by the way, he convinced me about Quantum Leap. He didn't convince me about the other one. When they went away to college, I had a strong sense that a piece of me was somewhere else. It was I'm used to it now, but it's never gone away, that a piece of me is somewhere else. And so I want to know what they're doing. I want to hear about how they spend their time, so that when Ben went hiking in the South Island, New Zealand, and New Zealand Alpha last year, I wanted to tell me all about that. And when Greg goes to a conference and delivers a paper or writes a book, tell me all about that. I want to know about where they are, because what they are doing feels very much like a piece of me are doing, though both of them are much smarter and do better work than I ever did. Every time I get this, every time I can talk with them on the phone, it ends with I love you, and every minute I spend with them is precious.
Good morning. My name's Dave Bonneau, and I'm a dad. I have 4 children and a glorious wife, my sweetheart. While growing up, I got to know a lot of dads. Dads come in all styles: kind, abusive, noble, common, smart, not so smart. Some of these dads make great impressions on me, and some were pretty forgettable. The greatest dads were forgettable until I took the time to get to know them and hear their stories. This makes me wonder how many other dads I missed by prejudging them as forgettable. My dad loved everyone he met. As a kid, so many times he would just seem to disappear, and I would find him talking to the mailman or a policeman or a house painter. He was fascinated by everyone. He was always interested in how they did their job, where they came from, and where they were going. He taught me how to use tools, plan projects, how to respect people, how to learn from them, how to teach them. He taught me not to jump to conclusions, to listen, learn, and then make decisions, and then make mistakes, and then make more decisions, and make some more mistakes. In high school, I auditioned for a local Boston rock band. I was in Worcester, so it was a drive. A week after not hearing from them, I asked my dad whether I should call them. He said, "Well, why not? I'd rather hire a pest than somebody who didn't care to call." He says, "What's the worst thing that can happen? They'll say no, and you'll know sooner. But at least you will know." I covered I covered one night for their drummer who was sick, and I got the gig. The problem was I was 17. The other 7 band members were either out of college or in music school, 20 to 30 years old. I said to them, "Why did I get the gig?" And they said, "'Cause you can shut up." My dad didn't panic, however. Together we talked to the band elders and made sure that I would be safe. I made promises to handle the school, be responsible. Because of my dad's help and support, I played 5 gigs per week for 2.5 years in high school with the best people in the business. He could have said no, but he never said no. He always took time to talk it out and let his children make the decisions. In fact, sleeping in English class, which was my first class of the morning in high school, afterwards my teacher asked me, what was going on. I said, "I play for this band, Fate. I'm out 2 nights a week during the week." And he said, "Really?" She said, "Really?" Yeah, I said, "Yeah." Fate? Yeah, it's a good band, horn band, Tower of Power, Sly, Chicago, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Wow, yeah, I've heard them. Well, frankly, have a nice sleep, because there's nothing I can teach you that would be better than what you're going through. My older brother wanted to buy a motorcycle in college. Rather than say no, they're too dangerous, my dad sent my brother 2 letters. One from an insurance company about the cost, risks, and statistics. The other telling my brother his opinion as his dad. But my choice was my brother's. He didn't get it. He bought a Carmen Ghia instead, which is, I think, equally dangerous and deadly. After high school, I struggled through engineering school. I was an absolutely horrible student. But I went into business with my dad. I worked for 3 years for nothing while we grew a business, because he was my dad. And we built a company. He was a wonderfully clever mechanical engineer. He would display solutions to our customers, and they would just chuckle. It was so cool. He was just a glorious brain, wonderful mind, and he was so kind while he was doing it. He would say, "Make sure our customers know everything you know about what we're doing for them, so they can be on their own if we're not around." When the rest of us engineers, he would get us together, and every so often he'd say, "At some point you guys are going to all agree on something, and it isn't going to be worth a crap." He would say, "Anyone can not." When the problem was really tough, he says, "Anybody can not solve this. I mean, you can not do anything, can't you? So let's get started." At the birth of our first child, my dad said to me, the best thing a dad can do for his children is love their mother. He did this in spades. He never missed the opportunity to tell his children he loved them, and his wife that he loved her. As his grandchildren entered the kitchen for a visit, the first order of business was give a hug to pups. It was a way of life for us. The day he passed away, I felt like the luckiest person to have been taught by him, worked with him, loved by him, and that I was able to thank him in person the night before. How great is that? To paraphrase Christopher Hitchin, I grew up Catholic, so I'm here at the end of a long road. But Christopher Hitchin really put it together for me. He was a proclaimed atheist, of course. Expressing love to people you are close to is at the core of our very survival as a species. Without someone to care for us for the first 10 to 12 years of our lives, we would perish. We would not survive. So does it come from someone else? Does it come from a higher being? We wouldn't be here without love. So I ask ministers, you have this phrase, God is love. And they say, yes, God is love. So there's an equal sign there. Is love God? I mean, we get this silence just like this. Is love God? They've all said, nah, I don't think so. Because then the proprietary nature of the religion would go away, wouldn't it? Another great dad, my Uncle Leon. He was the head groundskeeper at a country club. This was a job very different from my very competitive uncles. My dad showed great respect for Leon, for his ethic and his life choice. What was so bad about being a greenskeeper? You know, it was always kind of, well, yeah, he's a greenskeeper. So I thought, how did he get there? What's the problem? That's the bus going by. We're on the same frequency. I know this, I'm a radio guy. So the job was very different than my uncle's, but why did they say, oh yeah, he's a greenskeeper? Well, there's a reason for it. There's a reason for every dad. There's a reason for the way they treat us and the way they're treated and we treat people, and there are reasons. 15 years ago, my daughter and I took roles in The Sound of Music. I was her dad and she was, what, Liesl? Was it? Brigida. She was little. This is my sweetheart, by the way. It was Liesl. Okay. That was a different one. No. To prepare, we went to see Uncle Leon. He was an alpine rescuer in World War II, like right out of a James Bond movie. You know, white clothes, a parachute, skis. They would jump from planes and parachute in to help others. He was so kind, taking us to lunch at the country club and taking our questions after at his home. He showed us war letters that he was still receiving in his 70s. They talked about Billy taking a bullet next to him in a foxhole, and many others caught up in this horrific theater. He mentioned how the enemy would shoot at the stretchers, not the medics, they'd shoot at the stretchers. It was much more demoralizing to the enemy to stabilize their friends under fire and make their way to the ambulance in the snow and the battle, only to have their patient declared dead as they entered the truck from the bullets. After his European tour, Leon went to a ship. He was on a ship to Okinawa. Nobody on the ship spoke for 2 weeks. It was a death march on a boat. They all knew they were dead. 3 days through the Panama Canal, the ship turned around. It wasn't until he landed in Florida that he found out the war had ended. So before we judge, we should know what we know and what we don't know about people. My high school age daughter was playing a regional soccer game, so she couldn't go to it, to an art awards ceremony. So I went to receive it for her. Before I went up, I was told that I had to cite a remarkable person and the words that most represented them. After receiving the certificate, I said, in the words of the late, great Frank Bonneau, it seemed like a good idea at the time. That's so forgiving. You know, like a lot of people, he just looked dumbfounded. It seemed like a good idea at the time. But think about it. So many times we're surprised with seemingly unsurmountable problems. We would try something and fail, but every time we learned from it. Seemed like a good idea at the time is a great way to say to yourself, I did what I thought was right, I forgave myself, and I'm trying again. The next one I love is embrace those who seek the truth, beware of those who found it. You heard that? A few years ago, at a Catholic church that I was singing in as a bass ringer, they were kind of coming out about the whole abuse scandal. There was a move afoot to have parishioners sign a petition against gay marriage. Wow. At the time, I was singing church at the bass soloist in the chorus. The priest asked me to sign the petition. You know, I'm a paid hand. I refused, saying that I have a lesbian daughter who I treasure beyond all. That's what dads do. Blame it on the kids. Don't say I love you unless you mean it. Have you heard that? Don't say I love you unless you mean it. I don't get this. If anybody has an idea, shout it out. Maybe this came from World War II. Where loss was so prolific. I don't know, just a thought. One day, my high school age son was deeply depressed about his relationship with his friends. And we were very worried about him. He was just in an awful state. A psychologist friend of mine, in fact, the guy who hired me for the band, the sax player, was a great dad. And he took him for the afternoon to get to know him. He said, Dave, they're kids, they're teenagers, and they're trying to kill him just for the entertainment of it, you know, with the booze and the drugs. He says it's time he needs a new best friend, and you're elected. Quit what you're doing, quit the singing, quit the plays, quit the drums. Take what you do for you and put it aside. I did that, and I got to know him better by talking to him both as a dad and, more importantly, as a friend. Remember the first time we went out, he said, Dad, you got to get me out of here. The guys are coming over. I can't be here. It's a Wednesday night. I said, fine, we'll go into Boston. We went to the Regatta Bar, and Tito Puente was playing. Yeah, he needed hope. My son needed hope. Okay, this is whacked. When I was a kid, very young, just learning to read, I was going through the want ads and, just thinking about guys and where they've been through. Norton Company was advertising for machinists of all kinds. I was slogging through these, and I just saw one after another, and it said, we need a machinist for a milling machine or a lathe, CNNA. CNNA. Anybody take a guess on that? CNNA. So I asked my dad. He said, understand something. In the 1960s in Worcester, people were segregated by nationality as to what they could do as an occupation. He said, I'm sure this was the case in Boston and most of Massachusetts cities. If you were French, you were a carpenter. Italians did the roads, Irish bricklayers, Swedish machinists, Greek restaurants. Being near the sea, I suspect the Portuguese were fishermen. That's the way it was. Turns out if you were a machinist, you must be Swedish and of course Lutheran. CNNA means Catholics need not apply. Right in the paper. Yeah. So you wonder, what do these guys go through, and you imagine that's where people come from. In fact, within that stereotype, my dad and his dad were both Catholics. They were carpenters, and fortunately for them, French-Canadians, so they could work. My grandfather built the test equipment for Dr. Chang at the Worcester Foundation of Experimental Biology, which was the birthplace of the pill. 2 wars in the Depression took both my grandfathers, so I didn't know either of them. They lost they lost everything in the crash. And they were very heavy drinkers, and you can probably guess why. There was one, I'll end with this because I know I'm going over. There was one great, great dad that I never really took the time to speak to, though I could have, because he invited me a number of times. This guy grew a company in his lifetime from 0 to $800 million. And this wasn't an internet company where your valuation is based on, some people in the stock market. He had buildings and thousands of people. He was the first one to pay people to not smoke in the state. He went through all of that, and he used to give people lunch so they didn't have to leave. They could if they wanted to, but it's very progressive. He paid for 62 people to attend college, personally. If you could make a case, he'd pay for your college. He employed thousands, upwards of 10,000 people over his lifetime. And he was a great guy to work with. And I said, hey, because I knew him personally, I said, congratulations on your 5th grandson. Isn't this wonderful? 5th grandchild. How great is that? He says, yeah, it's pretty cool. I said, what do they call you, Pops? He says, no, they call me Mr. McDonough. I said, well, isn't it great just to hold them? He says, no, I don't really get to know them until they're about 6 years old. It's just... So I'm thinking, boy, how whacked is that? But it's kind of cool. It kind of remember Christopher Walken in Catch Me If You Can? And this was what it was like with my dad. Matt Damon is called into the principal's office in the high school, not because he's attending there. He went in to attend, but he walked into a class and their substitute teacher wasn't there, so he started teaching the class. So for 6 months, he was their substitute teacher until they found out that he's actually a student. And so Christopher Walken is his dad. He comes in and he says, oh, he shouldn't have done that in the principal's office. And the scolding, and well, you have to leave. Yeah, okay. So they're walking down the hall, and this smile, kind of comes over Christopher Walken. He says, you really do that? He says, yeah. He says, that's pretty cool. This song is about a dad who wants to be a dad but can't be a dad. His brother, Dr. Craven, is trying to drive him nuts and take over his estate. He's forbidden Archie to have any contact with his son. So Archie sneaks into his room, his son's room at night, and reads to him from the book of All Things Great and True. And this is what the song is from. It's from the musical The Secret Garden. You familiar with the book, the children's book? Thanks in advance to Fred. So let's see, Colin. Last night, the hideous dragon dragged the maid to his cave by moonlight, gnashed his teeth, breathed his fire, the earth quaked, and we trembled in fear. And I said, someone must save this sweet great and deadly, but surely the cost will be steep. So we left